The 1980 presidential campaign, 1 week to go, the final round. Like most of the campaign, mainly a television event. Tonight we'll examine the role that television has played in this year's election and whether it's been good or bad for the political process. We'll have a commentary on television news coverage as seen by a leading media critic. And we'll talk with an expert on television and American politics. And on day 359 for the American hostages, Iran's parliament again fails to resolve its own differences on the hostage issue.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
Good evening. Most Americans get most of what they know about the political campaigns of our presidential candidates right here. Oh, not here on this particular broadcast, but here on television. That's not in and of itself good or bad. It's simply a fact of political life these days. The candidates and their campaign staffs know it, cater to it, shape and schedule their days because of it. It seemed reasonable, therefore, especially on the eve of the Carter-Reagan debate, which may be the single most influential television event of all, that we step back and take a brief look at the process, and to a degree, at ourselves. We begin with this report from Steve Shepard.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next president of the United States of America, Ronald Reagan.
Most Americans will never see a presidential candidate in person. They won't be on hand as Ronald Reagan, accompanied by some eye-catching PR, sweeps into town to press the flesh and ask for votes. They won't be there as President Carter steps into a high school auditorium to explain why he should be re-elected. But Carter and Reagan and even John Anderson are as familiar to most Americans as the neighbors across the street. That's because presidential candidates are only as far as the nearest TV set. It's fair to say that the campaigns are often geared almost exclusively to getting good coverage on nightly TV broadcasts. A campaign trip President Carter began last Friday explains a great deal. The starting point was Andrews Air Force Base just outside Washington. On this day, reporters for the newspapers, wire services, and network TV begin to gather just after noon for 2 days of travel to New Jersey and the Midwest. Personal belongings are sent to the cargo hold of the press plane, but TV cameras and recorders stay in the hands of the TV crews. They are too delicate to be left to baggage handlers and too important not to be available on a moment's notice. Washington Post staff writer Robert Kaiser has long observed the role of TV in presidential campaigns.
The way these campaigns are organized now, as you know better than I, the candidates arrange everything for your cameras. It doesn't really matter very much if Jimmy Carter is in New Jersey or Texarkana or the suburbs of Chicago. For the national news that night, it all looks the same.
But it does matter that the TV cameras have a chance to get the best possible picture of the candidate. Thus, on this trip, like all others, the press plane takes off some 20 minutes before Air Force One. That way, the TV cameras can be rolling when the president arrives at his first stop. During the flight, there are moments of joking and light banter, but that ends immediately upon landing. When the press plane lands, it's best to look out. Correspondents and camera crews only have a few moments to set up for the arrival of the president. They don't let anyone get in their way. The people of Gloucester City, New Jersey, found that out about 30 minutes later. President Carter did his best to wave to Gloucester City supporters, but many got a better view of camera crews than the president. Inside the local Knights of Columbus Hall, it was again clear that Carter's appearance was made for TV. Even traveling print journalists had a hard time seeing the president over the TV equipment. When the Carter appearance was over, TV correspondents took a few seconds to summarize what they'd seen and then spoke to their cameras.
They would hurt even more tomorrow. Sam Donaldson, ABC News, Gloucester, New Jersey. Do it.
ABC's Sam Donaldson then rushed to an awaiting helicopter for the 8-minute flight to WPBI, the ABC affiliate in nearby Philadelphia. By now, he had less than 2 hours to write and edit a report on the Carter campaign for ABC's World News Tonight.
Okay, stop. That's it. That's it. Okay.
The time pressure is fierce. Emotions sometimes run high. There are few moments for reflection or analysis. However, by 6 o'clock Eastern Time last Friday night, the president's trip to New Jersey was on the air. Millions viewed it through the reports carried on the 3 network newscasts. That's just as the Carter campaign wanted it to be. But despite the trip and all the energy that went into getting it on TV, there is evidence that this year at least, TV hasn't had much effect on the election.
I think we have to face the fact that there's been very little movement in popular opinion in this election since September. We started out with about 40% for Carter and about 40% for Reagan and a lot of undecided voters, and that's what we've got today.
But there is one major TV event to go, tomorrow's debate in Cleveland, and that event could be the biggest single factor in the 1980 election. Steve Shepard, ABC News, Washington.
Tom Shales writes a syndicated column about television for the Washington Post. Occasionally, he has something nice to say about the business, but not often enough for it to become habitual. We asked Mr. Shales to take a critical look at television news this campaign year, and he took us literally.
You're not supposed to chop the messenger's head off just because you don't like the news he brings. But it might not hurt to slap him around a little, especially if he had a big hand in creating that news. We're now near the end of a long year of campaign coverage on network television. And do we feel excited and enlightened? No. A lot of us feel bored and exasperated. If apathy is as widespread as some think, and since more people rely on television for news than any other single source, maybe television itself should share the blame for this national disenchantment. Maybe they haven't been telling the story of the campaign and the campaigners the best possible way. Television tends to turn campaigns into Kentucky derbies, candidates into cartoon characters, and elections into game shows. Pity the poor politico who doesn't turn himself into a first-class TV star. TV reporters even report to us now about how well or badly a candidate is using television. When Roger Mudd put the screws to Teddy Kennedy way back in the early days, the image of Kennedy as tongue-tied was picked up by nearly every other TV reporter, and this helped bring about Kennedy's defeat. When John Chancellor twice began the NBC Nightly News with stories of alleged verbal goofs by Ronald Reagan, a pattern was established, and Reagan was intimidated into tight-lipped retreat. Television actually encourages candidates not to say what they really think. It may even encourage them not to say anything at all. TV reporters, on the other hand, seemed struck with Watergate fever. They wanted to tell us the secret, devious motivation behind every political speech or act, whether there was one or not. It's an approach that breeds cynicism, maybe as much about the reporters as about the candidates. When NBC's Chris Wallace reported snidely that Reagan forces staged what Wallace called a Hollywood production, you wondered whether Wallace was trying to tell us what was what, or, like some other reporters, make himself a star. Meanwhile, Walter Cronkite drops by the White House for a chummy chat with President Carter, and the two of them sound like members of the same yacht club. ABC's Good Morning America announces it will spend this last week of the campaign doling out polls and more polls, telling us not about the candidates, but about ourselves. The best political coverage may have been on something called C-SPAN, a cable network that carries the House of Representatives, but also specials called the election process. These let you see political speeches and rallies without the overly interpretive translations of network news people, without that tidy little scene of the reporter standing in front of the airplane as the candidate walks up the stairs and goes bye-bye. It's silly to talk anymore about television and our political system. Television is part of our political system. People may not be so much fed up with politics as fed up with the television version. It'll be a relief to hear the candidates speak for themselves at length at the Cleveland debates. But we know that the networks will be there to tell us what the candidates really meant almost the minute they stopped talking. This is Tom Shales.